One day I was walking through a park right on Ohio State's campus, big grass area, and I could hear a man preaching. It was actually more like yelling than preaching. And he was saying, "Prostitute, whore, you will burn in the fire." And I remember just spinning around like, what in the world is that? And I walked over, and here's this guy just shouting at people as they're walking by going to class. And in his mind, he was telling them the truths about who God is and how much they need God in their life. And it was just mayhem. It was like a circus freak. There's all these people standing around watching him. And so I started to argue with him and say, this is not okay. Like, the way you're talking is not okay. This is not the heart of God. This is not the way that God would represent himself. And next thing I know, he starts rattling off scripture after scripture at me. And I was just reeling. I had no idea how to make sense of these scriptures about God's wrath and his judgment. And so, I kind of argued with him for a while, but I just found myself spinning. And I went home that day just totally confused. I couldn't make sense of what happened. I couldn't understand how somebody could know so much of the Bible and yet so misrepresent the life that I knew that I had in Jesus. And it made me think about how this story of God really works, like how it's possible to hear this story and focus on only certain parts. I'm sure you would understand this. Like if you think about a movie, like it would be possible to watch only part of a movie where everything goes like really wrong and is bad and is messed up and horrible things happen. And you miss maybe the whole second half of the movie where there's redemption and reconciliation and things are made right again. It's possible for people to hear the story and yet not know the whole story. And it made me rethink, like, how do I explain my life with God? How do I make sense of these parts of the story? Because the Bible doesn't describe a faith in God that's just rosy and sunshine and eating cotton candy. I mean, the Bible describes the world as it really is, with all of the horrible things that happen, all of the corruption and greed and pain and suffering of the world, but that God shows himself to be a redeemer. The arc of the story is a story of redemption, of healing, of transformation, of how God can work miracles in the midst of suffering. So I kept going out and arguing with him, trying to persuade him that he should tell the whole story. And one day, out of the blue, in the middle of arguing with him, in the middle of the grass, he looked at me and said, "Listen, if the Jesus you worship is so much different than the one that I'm describing, why don't you take some grass out here and why don't you tell people about Jesus? Why do you have to steal my crowd? Why don't you make your own crowd? Why don't you show some courage and you say something about God?" And it stopped me in my tracks because I thought, what would I say? I mean, how do you describe this story in a way that makes sense of the faith that I have in Jesus? I wonder what you would do in that moment. I mean, if you were asked to describe the story of God and the story that we find ourselves in, would you be able to describe a God that is trustworthy, is kind and generous? Because I found myself lacking in that moment. I realized I really don't know what to say that makes sense of all of the horrible things, but also shows who God is, how generous and kind and beautiful he is. And it really comes down to an issue of what we focus on. There's so much pain in the world. There's so much that's wrong with the world. And God reveals himself fully in the person, in the life, and the teaching of Jesus. And he shows us the way the world could be, how God intervenes. And ultimately, the end of the story is, of course, God making all things new again, that all things are restored and redeemed in Jesus, and that those of us that follow him get to experience a taste of that future reality in the present. That's the story that we have to tell, but it means that we have to be able to focus rightly on that which brings life, not just the things that bring us discouragement and frustration, not just telling a story that gives people an impression of God as though he's angry and frustrated and disappointed and distant, to tell a story that shows how God is reaching into the lives of broken people and making them new again. It's really about what you focus on.